Jane's going to come and read, and then over to Tristan.
There are two readings today. The first from Hebrews chapter 11. I don't know whether we've got pages up there, but page 1209 in the church Bibles. Just verse 7. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. And then in Genesis chapter 6, and from verse 9, page 8. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Good evening. So as Dave said, we are on to the second instalment of our Heroes of Faith series, and we are looking at our first hero. It's a great start. I can't even tell if that's on. Oh, it's not. Can we start again? Just pause the tape. I need my clicker. Hey, Noah! This is going to be great. So it was 2 weeks ago that Darryl started this series because Dave interrupted us with his return. But the couple of weeks ago, Darryl was looking at the context of this passage, and we've got the bookends of Hebrews 11, 1-3, and then Hebrews 12, 1-3. I love the way he talked about them as being bookends to this passage in the middle that's got all of the heroes listed. So today and for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at the stories of 5 of those people listed in Hebrews 11. There are loads, but we're just looking at 5. We're looking at Noah, Abraham, Joseph, Rahab, and Gideon. And we're going to hear a little bit about what their stories might mean for our own journeys of faith with Christ today. I need to apologise already because I did my slides on Friday and my sermon has changed since then. I know Simon and Ellie were looking forward to me talking about Evan Almighty, and so I got some stuff about Evan Almighty in there, and I'm not going to talk about it, but I'm sure you've all seen it. If you want something grittier, you can go with Darren Aronofsky's Noah, which is absolute baloney, but it's got some good bits in it, which is a nice depiction of the Ark. Anyway, that's those bits gone. That was going to take much longer. Sorry, Simon. We would have been here till about 9 o'clock. So actually, before we kind of get into Noah, I wanted to just summarise Daryl's talk from a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully I can do it justice in one slide. I think he did a great job of just setting that context up, as I said, and how we should think about the heroes. So the context of Hebrews 11 is that it's written to encourage Christians who were struggling with that long-haul nature of following Jesus, which by this time perhaps they'd come to realise was going to be the norm. It was written to Jewish Christians, hence all of these Old Testament stories as examples. And the intention of the book and the passage, this in particular, is to build up the faith of those people who found following Jesus difficult. And I guess you might agree that applies as much to us today as it did to the original receivers of the letter. The next point was that faith is relational. It's not something we can just summon by screwing up our eyes and trying really hard. It's based on trust in the person of Jesus. And it's based on knowing him well. Next, faith isn't just about intellectual assent. It needs to be turned into action. Think of James 2. James 2 says that faith without action is dead. The letter to the Hebrews moves from discussing faith in this passage, discussing faith in general, and then it starts applying it to all these different stories that the readers would have been really intimately familiar with. It gives faith as the reason that the heroes in those stories were able to do what they did. Faith in God was the reason they were considered heroes at all. And we're invited to step into each of those stories. They would have known them so well that would have all just come flooding to them. But we're invited to step into each story, to experience it through each of those heroes' lives, imagining ourselves in their position perhaps, hearing from God and relying on faith in him. I love the picture that then you get in Hebrews 12 of running a race. And the heroes mentioned in chapter 11 are part of this great cloud of witnesses cheering us on as we run. You may know I do some running. For those of you who also run and you've done races, perhaps you've experienced that thing where the people who are good finish way before you, but they hang around at the end, or they maybe even come up the course a little way and they cheer you on as you finish. If nothing else, it makes you realise that the end is near and you can have a rest. But it's really good to have them supporting you as you finish. So what's the purpose of this list of all these heroes? I have to confess, I often read this chapter and focus on the fact that each of these people is flawed in some way. And, you know, they did things wrong, but nevertheless, God still used them. And that makes me feel a little bit better about myself, because it's not just me. And we can look at them, can't we, and say, well, they did stupid things too, and God still used them. Is that the purpose of this list? I don't think it is. I think the purpose of mentioning all these heroes isn't so we can feel better about ourselves. It isn't even so that we can try to be like them or copy exactly what they did. Darryl made the point that they are on the sidelines of the race. They're cheering us on. They're not our focus. They point us towards the one who is. They point us towards Jesus. So I hope I've done that justice. It's a lot quicker than he did it. But that's the context in which we're now going to turn and look at the story of Noah. So rather than mimicking him, we want his story to encourage us in our own races, to inspire us to focus more intently on Jesus. to reach the finish line and eventually become part of that great crowd of witnesses cheering on those who come behind us. So I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different. And I've been assured that the guys at the Six are up for trying something new. At least we've got the space to do that. So I'd like us to imagine ourselves in Noah's shoes as we go through the story. And I'm going to go through the story quite slowly. We've heard some of it read by Jane earlier, but I want to do it differently. And if it helps you, you can close your eyes while I do this, but don't go to sleep, please. I am then going to make some points, but my prayer really is that as we do this, the Holy Spirit will speak directly to you, and the bit that I've got at the end that doesn't matter. But God will speak to you as we do this, as you imagine yourself in the story. Listen for his insights. Take note of the things that might stand out. What's God trying to say to you through Noah's story? You ready? Here we go. It's nearing the end of the Stone Age. You're living in ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, in a fertile area of land nestled between two great rivers, the Tigris to the north and the Euphrates to the south. Beyond the Tigris, the land becomes mountainous and desolate. Beyond the Euphrates is desert wasteland. You live in a small family unit that includes your wife, 3 sons and their wives, as well as your father, Lamech, and your grandfather, Methuselah. Together, you worship the Creator, recounting tales of his great works throughout the ages. Your father's favourite story is that of his grandfather, Enoch, who knew the Creator so intimately that one day he was taken from the earth entirely and still lives with him in the heavens to this day. You long to know the Creator that well, to follow in your great-grandfather's footsteps. Although stories of the Creator have been passed down through your family for generations, the rest of the world seems to have forgotten him. The people living near you are cruel, violent, living only for themselves. And going near them is dangerous. They no longer honour the Creator and have forgotten that he entrusted humanity to look after all that can be seen. They consume and destroy and have no care for anything the Creator made. The world has become an evil place. One day as you're sitting in your shelter praying, you hear the Creator's voice speaking to you. He tells you that he's seen the wickedness around you and regrets that he even gave life to men. He plans to destroy everyone on earth. But you and your family have found favour with him. You will be safe. The Creator gives you instructions to build a boat, but this isn't like any boat the fishermen use on the river. It wouldn't even fit on the rivers nearby. You doubt it would even fit on the Euphrates. It's enormous. 140 metres long, 23 metres wide and 14 metres tall, with 3 decks and rooms inside for storage. You can't even begin to imagine how you're going to build it. But that's not the last of it. The Creator tells you that you'll need to fill it with pairs of birds and animals of all kinds, because he will keep them safe with you in the boat. How are you going to begin to do that? But you trust the Creator. You trust that what he says is true and that this is the only way to keep your family safe. So you begin to carry out his plan. You're going to need logs, tons and tons of logs, and you'll need to make ropes to lash it all together. Slowly, over the span of years, the boat starts to take shape. Decades pass, and still you fell trees and build the boat. It's bigger than anything you've ever seen. The people around you have lost interest. At first they were curious about what you were doing, and you tried to tell them about the boat. Sorry, about the flood. But now they just ignore you and leave you to it. Crazy Noah and his giant boat. There's not enough water in the world to float that thing, they say. More decades pass. In the meantime, your father and grandfather have died, but eventually the boat is complete. What now? The Creator speaks to you again. In 7 days, the rain will start and the floods will come. It's time to gather the animals and fill the boat. You start with domestic animals and somehow manage to get them on board. The wild animals seem to know what's happening and come to you. Perhaps the Creator speaks to them too. The 7 days are almost up. The boat is full of animals and food of all kinds. The noise and the smell are like nothing you've experienced before. You gather your family together and all enter the boat. The Creator himself closes the door just as the rains begin to fall. The following days are chaotic as torrents of water pour from everywhere. Those living nearby find shelter on high ground as the boat is lifted from the floor by the rising water. But their refuge grows smaller and smaller until the floods cover it, and they're gone. Days and weeks pass, and eventually the rain stops. But the floods remain. After 5 months on board, the floating boat comes to a stop with a gigantic crash, lodged on something deep beneath the surface. 3 months later, the peaks of mountains start to appear out of the flood. The water's going down. Almost 2 months later, and you now have proof of new growth on the uncovered land. One of the doves that flew from the boat has returned with an olive leaf in its beak. It can't be long now. 2 more months pass, and the Creator speaks. Release the animals. Take your wife, your sons, and their wives, and leave the boat. The feeling you get as you step out onto land after a year on board is like being reborn. The first thing you want to do is to build an altar and make offerings to your Creator, worshipping him for his faithfulness in bringing you and your family safely through, just as he said he would. So just pause for a moment before we carry on. Just think, what jumped out at you? Did you see anything in that story that you haven't seen before? Did you have any strong feelings about anything? What might God be saying through that? I almost don't want to carry on, but I'm going to. I love that image that we've got in Hebrews 12. I mentioned it already, of just the heroes cheering us on as we run that race. And I thought to myself, what would Noah be shouting from the sidelines if he was there cheering? What encouragements might he yell at us, to us? I think he'd encourage us to be obedient. Throughout the story, there are verses like, Noah did everything just as God commanded him. It's in chapter 6. In chapter 7 it says, and Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. When he's introduced, we read that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. The ESV simply says, Noah walked with God. Noah did everything that God asked him to. He was obedient in all that God commanded. Are we obedient? Could it be said of us that we did all that God commanded? It's not enough to do some of what God commands. Obedience when it suits us isn't really obedience at all. It's just a convenient alignment of God's will with ours. Obedience is only really obedience when it isn't convenient, when it doesn't serve our purposes, and when, if we're honest, we'd rather not obey. But our allegiance is to Jesus. He is the Lord of our lives. Do we acknowledge his lordship in every area, big or small? I was reading the book Amazed by Jesus by Simon Ponsonby, and in a chapter about the lordship of Jesus, he quotes Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who writes this: "He did not go to the cross to ornament and embellish our life. If we wish to have him, then he demands the right to say something decisive about our entire life." If you look back at Hebrews chapter 12, it says, "Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run the race marked out for us." The course has been marked out for us. We don't decide the direction in which we run. It's Jesus who directs our path. And to follow it is to be totally obedient to him. What stops us from obeying? Often it can be fear. And fear is quite similar to faith. If you take the bit at the beginning of Hebrews 11 and you replace the word hope with dread, it reads, "Now fear is being sure of what we dread and certain of what we do not see." It kind of works. Fear says, "Oh, but what if?" And faith says, "Yeah, but what if?" If we know that we are fully loved and accepted by the creator of the universe, whether we obey him or not, he still loves us. If we fully feel that, then fear of man has nothing on us. Psalm 118 reads, "The Lord is for me, so I will have no fear. What can mere people do to me?" Because it all goes back to our relationship with him. The more we know Jesus, the easier it is to trust him and to obey him. So what else is Noah shouting out as we fly past? Perhaps he might encourage us to persevere. The narrative in the Bible doesn't tell us exactly how long it took Noah to build the ark. Dave this morning said 40 years. I read 80, so it's somewhere in there. I think if you take the numbers in the Bible, it's no more than 100. And I guess that's longer than most of us here have been alive. It's 80 years of holding on to what he'd heard from God and acting on it. And then when he goes into the ark, he ends up being shut inside there for a year, over a year. You thought lockdown was bad. But Noah had faith in God and he stuck with it until God told him it was time to leave. Again, we don't read anything about the reaction of the people. I mean, you hear in the stories that they mocked him and they jeered him. It doesn't say anything about what the people around him thought. But we can assume it probably wasn't easy. They were described as wicked and violent, and that probably had some effect on Noah. Perhaps he tried to persuade them to help, to join him and on the ark and escape the disaster. But these people had abandoned God. At best, they would have been apathetic. They didn't care about the far-fetched idea of a flood. I think sometimes, like Noah, we can contend against apathy. We're not talking about a flood, we're not talking about a boat, we're proclaiming Jesus, who is God's all-encompassing ark of salvation. And I guess sometimes we can find that people aren't interested. But it doesn't mean we should stop trying. It was God's revelation that enabled Noah to trust in the ark. Do we persevere in praying for God's revelation in those around us, that they would see their need for salvation? Finally, Noah's yelling out at us as you almost to the finish line, and he's reminding us that God keeps his promises. At the start of Genesis 8, it says, God remembered Noah, which is always a funny way of putting it. It sounds like he'd forgotten him. It doesn't mean he'd forgotten him, but that the phrase indicates that God's about to take action to fulfill his promise. Noah and his family had avoided destruction in the flood, but they're still afloat, and there's no sign of any land at that point. They weren't safe yet, but God kicks into action. The sequence of events in chapter 8 actually reflects the creation story right at the start of Genesis. First, we get this wind blowing across the water, and the Hebrew word there is ruach, if I've pronounced that right, which is the same word that gets translated as spirit earlier on. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. It's basically the same sentence. Then we see dry land appearing out of water. Then we get plants brought to Noah by the dove. And then the ark is opened and the earth is populated once more by animals. And then last of all, Noah and his family, men and women, walk on the land. And then what does God tell them? He says, be fruitful and multiply. The same words he spoke to Adam and Eve right at the beginning. Decades have passed since God's first words to Noah, since he first told him to build the ark, but God was faithful to his word and brought him safely through. Decades and decades. Have you been holding on to a promise that God's given you, perhaps for years? Don't give up on it. God is always faithful. He works on his time frame, but he's always faithful. I'm nearly done. But I just want to jump backwards a little bit more and look at Hebrews 10, verse 36, which says this. It says, you need to persevere so that when you've done the will of God, you'll receive what he has promised. All those points are there, packed into a single verse. I actually found that verse after I put all those points, and it blew me away. Persevering in obedience and receiving God's promises. As we run our race on the course marked out for us by Jesus, listen to the writer of Hebrews and to Noah, cheering from the sidelines. Be obedient. Persevere. Receive the promises of our faithful God. Amen.
Lee, if we can keep that last slide up, please. Click through them. I just want to give us just a few moments to just allow God to speak to us. You know, so often we just rush on, don't we? But let's just pause. And let's just really ask God, what is it that he wants to say to us? Which one of those is what we really need to hear today? Just maybe for some it is that total obedience that God wants to say, I want you to do all the things, not just the things that you enjoy and want to do, but all the things that I've commanded you to. Maybe actually for some of us here, we just need to hear that call to persevere. I was really struck by that verse at the end of Hebrews 10, and I was actually looking at this earlier, and the verse before that, actually, before it says you need to persevere so that when you've done the will of God, you'll receive what he had promised. It actually starts by saying, so do not throw away your confidence. And I just wonder whether actually some people have lost confidence and actually are struggling to persevere. We lost confidence perhaps in that, is God going to come through? Can I do this? And then thirdly, just some of us need to be reminded again of God is always faithful. Maybe actually just that phrase, God remembers you, is the phrase for some of you tonight. God remembers you, where you feel actually you've been forgotten and stuff hasn't worked out. Maybe for some here tonight, God remembers you. So just encourage you, let's just spend 2 or 3 minutes of quiet, listening to God and allowing him to meet us in those things. We're going to sing a couple of songs to just finish, but there's going to be a chance as we sing these songs to receive ministry, have someone pray with you, or feel free just to turn to someone next to you and ask them to pray with you. But there'll certainly be people at the back who will be really would love to just pray through any of this stuff which God has been sharing tonight. So just at any point as we sing these last couple of songs, feel free to go for prayer and receive prayer ministry tonight.